friends, welcome back to Paradise Lost in Books. I'm Christy, and today I'm going to talk to you about one of my favorite books in the whole wide world, Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. This is hands down the best book in the series, and it's definitely one of my favorite books of all time right now. This is the second book in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, so if you haven't read A Court of Thorns and Roses, I'll try to give a spoiler-free synopsis, but the spoiler-free synopsis for this book is assuming that you've read ACOTAR, so go away now if you haven't read ACOTAR. What are you doing here? Go read that book and then come back. So spoiler-free synopsis for this book. After Farah escapes Amarantha from under the mountain, we see her struggling with some PTSD, trying to adjust to life as a high fae, while also struggling with feelings of guilt and self-loathing for the murders that she committed under the mountain and all the pain that she perceives herself as causing based on her actions. On top of all this, she's concerned about the High Lord of the Night Court, Rhysand, calling in their bargain that she made with him, which was that she was to spend a week with him every month in the Night Court. When he finally does call in that bargain, she finds herself confronted with an evil far greater than anything that she has experienced yet, and she has to figure out what her role is going to be in that forthcoming war. That's really all I can say spoiler-free wise for ACOMAF. I'm going to start talking about spoilers, things I did and didn't like about the book, so definitely go away now and read ACOMAF if you haven't yet, and then come back and you can hear all of my thoughts and opinions and blah blah blah. Okay, so kind of like with ACOTAR, there's a lot of things I want to talk about, so instead of just doing likes and dislikes like I normally do, I'm going to talk about like characters and then plot stuff and just like break it down into sections because it's just easier for me that way. So let's start with characters, and the first character I want to talk about, surprisingly, is Tamlin. Okay, at the end of this book, everyone hated Tamlin, but I personally just pitied him. I was definitely not one of those people that was like, ugh, Tamlin's the worst person ever, like I hate him. Like, yeah, what he did was really, really shitty, don't get me wrong, like, not okay at all. But I also kind of understand where he's coming from, because even though he lied to Farah about his role in his rivalry with Rhys and how his father killed Rhys's mother and sister, he also knows that Rhys's power is mind control. So I can completely understand him being worried that Rhys is just manipulating Farah, and with him being the overprotective personality that he is, I can completely understand why that made him lose his absolute shit and go crazy. Now, on the other hand, he does need to realize that Farah is not his property, and it was really frustrating to watch him refuse to understand that she was legitimately suffering from PTSD and depression, and she had a lot of things going on that he just didn't know how to cope with and wasn't really willing to try and work through with her. Like, he always said he would, and then it was one of those situations where, like, he would change and then go back to the way it was. So obviously, it's just a case of him not being the right person for her, and I don't think he's a villain for that. I just think he's misguided, and I just kind of feel bad for him. Another cool thing about Tamlin was that after rereading the whole series, there were definitely a lot of setups in both the first book and this book for him being this way and showing us this side of his personality that maybe we missed in the first book, especially the first time we read it. In the first book, he does say a lot of things about protecting her and stuff like that, but in this book, he also says something like, I can protect you from anything, not accounting for the fact that she now has these powers and obviously she wants to learn how to protect herself. There's also a great quote that says, a protector, that's who he was and would always be. What I had wanted when I was cold and hard and joyless, what I had needed to melt the ice of bitter years on the cusp of starvation. So that's just kind of further showing that fact that he is a protector. It's what he does, like, and it was really well set up from ACOTAR going in to ACOMAF. And with that, I would like to segue into talking about Farah, because Farah changed a lot. Like, she even says so herself right there, that she's not the same person. You know, before she was joyless and focused primarily on protecting her family, whereas now she has been through an absolutely horrific, traumatizing experience, and she doesn't need someone to protect her anymore. She needs someone to support her and listen to her and just kind of be there, like give her the freedom to explore what has happened to her and kind of work through it. Like, being caged up is absolutely the last thing she needs. I mean, every time he does that, she flashes back to under the mountain. I mean, she even says something the first or second time she goes to the night court about how she feels hollow inside and she just doesn't care about anything. And that's like a textbook hallmark sign of depression. So this is clearly something that she's struggling with, and Rhys seems to understand that, whereas Tamlin really doesn't. But more about Farah specifically, I thought it was really interesting to see her character kind of growing and changing, and all the different things that she goes through, and how she learns more about herself and kind of comes to terms with who she is throughout the course of this book, because she obviously starts out with a lot of self-loathing and doubting her own worth, but she kind of works through that. And I feel like it was a very well-written process. Like, it never felt rushed or forced or anything. I felt it was a very natural progression from who Farah was at the end of ACOTAR and the beginning of ACOMAF to who she is at the end of ACOMAF. So Rhys, talk about a 180. I think some people knew that he was her mate at the end of ACOTAR when he like got freaked out and winnowed away, but I'm just dumb, I guess. I don't know, but I didn't really suspect that at all, so I was totally blindsided by his change and him being her mate. And the first time I read these books, I was just like, I didn't expect to love you, but I do. I love you so much, and you're just precious, and I didn't expect to have all these feelings and to jump ship from Phelan to Faison. Like, how did this happen? But it was so well done. It never felt like a fake out or a gotcha, which I do think that Sarah J. Maas does the fake out a lot, but this was a good fake out. Like, I was pleasantly surprised with how it happened, and it did feel very natural. It never felt like, oh, this is totally out of character, because like I said, you see kind of those building blocks throughout the series that kind of set you up without you even realizing it for a character to be a certain way. And Rhys's story was so sad. Like, I did not expect for him to have that kind of history with Tamlin, with their families, and all that kind of stuff. So that was really hard to read. And on that note, the Inner Circle is just like my favorite squad of all time, like ultimate squad goals. I feel like they each have a very distinct personality. That's one of the complaints I always had with Throne of Glass, was that all of the Fae males are like the same person, and all of the badass women are kind of the same person. None of them really felt distinct to me, but in this series, especially with the Inner Circle, it really felt like they were their own individual person with different goals and aspirations and personality traits, and they really just feel like a family. It was so much fun to read, and Moore is definitely my favorite. Like, Moore all day. Okay, now let's talk about Lucien. Oh, Lucien, he's like my other baby. Like, Rhys is like my first baby cinnamon roll, and Lucien is the other one. I just feel so bad for him because he obviously wants to do the right thing by Farah, and he can see that she's hurting, but he's also torn by his loyalty to Tamlin, because Tamlin is the reason that he has a place to go and isn't just like living in the woods, I guess. I don't know what would have happened. His brothers probably would have killed him eventually, but you know, I understand why he has that loyalty to Tamlin. I was also really surprised by him being mates with Elaine. I'm kind of not liking how it's looking like everyone is gonna end up with someone, but whatever. I'm not gonna say anything about how that all plays out in ACOWAR, but I will say that it was better than what I thought it was gonna be. The only thing I'm gonna say about Ianthe is that I knew that she was a snake and a bitch from the very beginning, and I don't know why Farah trusted her. I mean, I do. Farah was depressed and needed someone to just take control of everything, whatever. But I knew she was a snake, and I hate her. The last characters I'm going to talk about in this section are Nesta and Elaine. I was pleasantly surprised the first time I read this that they came back and were more important characters this time around, because after the first book, I was just kind of like, oh, okay, they were kind of like the evil stepsisters from Cinderella. Like, they had a role to play and now they're done. But they're back in a very surprising way. Now they're both Fae. Holy shit, right? I did not see that coming at all. That was crazy. But, you know, I'm glad that they're actually part of the story, because I feel like a lot of times in stories when you have a sibling relationship, unless the story is about the sibling relationship, they just aren't really all that important and we never really hear about them. So I'm really excited to talk about the dynamic between the sisters in the third book once we get there. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the things I liked and some of my favorite scenes from the book. This is definitely a personal preference because I know some people don't like this, but I really liked that everything felt very purposeful and planned and sequential. Like, we had her at the spring court, then, you know, she was at the night court, and then Valeris, and then there was like quests. I like it when there's like a checklist of quests to be checked off. You know, they went to the bone carver and they went to the summer court, and, you know, they had all of these important stops along the way, and it just felt very fluid but intentional. It was never really like murky as to what the plot was. Like, there were definite steps that had to be taken to reach the end goal, and I really liked that because it made each scene feel distinct and important and like it had its own place in the story. Especially because in ACOTAR, I felt like there was way too much lounging around. Like, my boyfriend is reading that book now, and he's like, oh my god, when does the story start? And I'm like, trust me, I felt the same way the first time I read ACOTAR. There's a whole lot of lounging around and painting and going on dates in the woods, but you know, the story doesn't really pick up until the end. So it was nice that with ACOMAF, it felt like from the very beginning there was, this is going to happen. This is the plot. This is what we have to do to achieve our goal, and this is how it's going to be. So that was nice. I really liked the cute little moments of Farah and Reese's relationship and how it kind of built up, because again, it never felt rushed or forced, or she was just jumping from one guy to the other. Like, she was very against him at the beginning, and then she kind of was getting to know him more, and I loved them writing the flirty notes back and forth to each other. That was super adorable, and I loved it. I just loved all the moments they had where it was just they were getting to know each other. Also, the training scene where she kind of lets it all out. She's fighting, I think, with Cassian, and she kind of just starts like going off and venting how she feels about Tamlin and the whole situation and how she feels like she has no self-worth, basically. Like, that was a really great scene, and it was a catharsis for the reader as well as Farah, for her to kind of get all those feelings out. I loved getting to see the summer court, and it just made me want to see even more of Prithian going into Akawar. But I loved getting to see the summer court and meeting Tarquin and getting to know him, and that whole scene was just so hard to read because you could tell that he is a genuinely good person who wants to do the right thing, and just reading that whole scene and knowing that Farah was gonna have to betray him was super, super painful. But it was a fun scene to read, and I liked how the water nymphs or water naiad kind of creatures came back at the end of that scene to help Farah and Amren out. I thought it was nice for one of the themes of the book about how Farah really is a good person and how her being a good person enables her successes in the story. I just have to say that Valeris sounds like the most amazing city in the world, and it makes me really sad that I'm never actually going to be able to go there because it's not real, but I just loved the description of Valeris, and I loved the Starfall scene. Everyone loves the Starfall scene. How could you not love the Starfall scene? But just every time I read it, it just gives me that like butterflies feeling that you get when a relationship is new. It's just such a sweet scene, and it just makes me feel all the things. I love that the cereal comes back. I like that he's actually kind of a character in the story, and how he's the one that is like, oh, shit, you didn't know you were mates? That's awkward. I love the relationship she has with the cereal, and you know, it's cool that he's not just a plot device in the story. He feels like he's his own character. Speaking of finding out they are mates, chapter 55. Wow. The first time I read that chapter, I was sitting in my classroom while my students were taking a test and finishing up and writing their essays, and I was just like, maybe I shouldn't read this right now, because I was like, this is just really awkward. But it was a really well done chapter. Sex scenes usually make me really uncomfortable, but except for a couple of strange lines here and there, it never really made me feel cringy. So, you know, well done with that. Sarah J. Maas. Also, at the part at the end where they trick you into thinking the mating bond was severed, absolutely scared the living shit out of me. I was like, you did not get me emotionally invested in this mating bond just to snap it here at the end of the story. Like, I was freaking out. I was so not okay, and I had to skip ahead to make sure that it wasn't really severed because I was not going to be able to live with it if it was. But not only with the mating bond still being intact, thank God, but I love that it ends with her being like the High Lady of the Night Court. It just got me so hyped for Act War. I was just like, oh my God, she's gonna fuck Tamlin's shit up, and it's gonna be so good. It's gonna be so good. So the end of the book just had me so excited and ready to read, and it was really hard to wait a whole year for Act War, but just overall, this book was just an emotional roller coaster. Even though I love this book, there are a couple of things that I was a little like, not so sure about. So I'll just mention those real quick. I had a little bit of an issue with the scene where Farah was pretending to be Reese's whore. Like, I understand that they were doing it as a distraction, but like, it's only furthering the idea in Tamlin's mind that she's being manipulated, because that's not who she was beforehand. Like, she's never been that kind of person ever. And so like, obviously Tamlin is gonna freak his shit and think that she's being manipulated and controlled by Reese. Like, I don't know, it just seemed like they could have come up with something a little bit better. It was an interesting scene, don't get me wrong, I loved the chemistry between them, but it was just kind of like, I know Reese has a part to play, but this just seems like it's only going to make things worse when Tamlin comes back in the end, like I knew he was going to, and guess what? It did! It made things a hell of a lot worse. Another thing was the constant on-the-nose comparisons between Reese and Tamlin. Like, you didn't have to tell us so directly so many times that Reese and Tamlin are totally different people, and Reese is right for her and Tamlin isn't. Like, we kind of got it through the general themes of the story, but it just felt like every chapter it was like, oh, Tamlin doesn't think there can be a High Lady, but Reese makes her the High Lady. Oh, Tamlin caged her up and Reese is letting her be free. Oh, Tamlin doesn't want her to train and Reese is like, go ahead and train, babe, I love you. And like the constant like going on about how with Tamlin I never had a choice. Tamlin made all my choices. Tamlin had Ianthe make all the choices for me and all this stuff. But with Reese I have choices, all of the choices, all of the time. It just felt like it was a constant belaboring of the parallels between Tamlin and Reese, and how Reese is this great guy who gave Farah freedom and helped bring her back to life after her crippling depression and PTSD, and Tamlin is this douchebag who locked her up and didn't give her any choices and wanted her to be his property, basically. It was constant, and you know, it's true, like, they weren't bad points, but it was just all the time. Like, it felt like I was constantly reading these things. It was just like, I get it. Overall, I did give this book 5 out of 5 stars. Despite the 2 things that I complained about, it was basically a perfect book for me. It gave me everything I wanted emotionally. It kept me on the edge of my seat, and I felt the characters were really well developed and had interesting, fully fleshed out arcs that made for an exciting read. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, guys. If you enjoyed it, I really hope you'll give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and let me know down below how you feel about A Court of Mist and Fury. Do you agree with my opinions? Is there something that I didn't talk about that you want to talk about in the comments? Just let me know, and I will definitely respond. Until next time, guys, bye!